So, welcome everyone. My name is Landon Bench. I'm president at FYTT. FYTT is a software for strength and conditioning coaches. And we are super excited. We've got Brad Lawson here tonight. And let me just give a little bio on Brad so you can get to know him a little better. And then we'll jump into his presentation and then we'll do some Q&A at the end. So looking forward to that as well to get some interaction with Brad. Brad is currently the return to performance coordinator for the for the Los Angeles Angels, excuse me. He has 16 years of experience in Major League Baseball as an S&C coach, and that's 12 years with the Giants, 2 years with the Cubs, and 1 year with the Nationals. Prior to being in the MLB, he was a S&C coach for a university hockey team, and he has a bachelor's and a post-grad degree from University of New Brunswick. So, Brad, if you've got anything else to add, any more details, life details, please help us get to know you better. But otherwise, we've got the slides up and we are ready to listen.
Thanks, Landon. I appreciate that introduction. I guess probably the only thing to add to that is New Brunswick is in Canada. Most people probably heard New Brunswick and they're just kind of like, where is that? But otherwise, no, I mean, all that sounds great. Really excited to be here tonight with you, and this opportunity to kind of talk about FYTT and Major League Baseball. Kind of at that point in my career where I've been out there the last 16, 18 years, and I've had this opportunity to receive so much information from other people. I'm usually on kind of the other side of the screen, listening into what other people are doing and stuff like that. And I just felt like it was time where I start, kind of giving back to the community that has given me so much. So really excited to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. So tonight, to everybody, is there valuable data currently being collected on your athletes that you struggle to take action on in real time? So let's take about maybe 30 seconds. Landon just opened up a poll. It's a simple yes or no response. We'll just take about 30 seconds for people to respond to that. Another 10 seconds. Just want to make sure that we have the right people in the room, because if that's not the group that we have here, then maybe I'm speaking to the wrong audience and everybody's way ahead of me as it is.
So, Brad, it looks like we have about 67% that say yes and 33% say no.
Awesome. So those 67%, you guys are welcome to say. The other 33%, you guys are way smarter than me. You guys don't need this. You guys are free to leave now. You guys can go ahead and go on with the rest of your evening if you would like. But you're more than welcome to stick around if you'd like. So moving on, kind of before we get started, I want to kind of give a little bit of a background, kind of more so on my thought process, or my insights into my beliefs when it comes to player development in baseball. And I hope that this provides some insight into why I believe that believe so much in a systems-based approach. One, I believe that success begins with the environments we create. These environments provide the opportunity to put everyone in position to maximize their potential on a daily basis, which can then bleed into years of success. Player development does not stop at the elite levels, and collaboration amongst all stakeholders is essential. Some of the stuff that you'll see in these slides today, some of these visuals and videos and stuff like that, is not a product of my own doing, but it's a product of a lot of people working together. And then to do this at the highest levels, we must utilize objective measures to understand individual needs and then rely on the art of coaching so that we can optimize each player's potential. And we can accomplish this if we have a series of systems that will help us refine our processes to optimize health and performance of our players. Now, I've kind of gone on about that enough. And before we get into the needs to systemize processes, I want to share what to expect out of this. So we're going to cover the importance of the systems-based approach. I'm going to identify some common barriers to maximizing health and performance in Major League Baseball. I'm going to discuss the need for athlete profiling and monitoring. And then in the end, I'll show some examples of how to utilize technology to help automate some training processes. Speaking of systems and processes, and I know we have all read or watched a TED Talk or at least heard of Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. And I bring this up because a lot of people who are in our profession have a very similar why. Nobody has gotten into this profession to become rich and famous. They want to stay in a game that they love. They want to help people. They want to be a part of something larger than themselves. And they have this servant leadership mentality about them. That is all great, but I want to move on from the why to the how. And when we move to the how level, there's a large amount of variability from person to person or organization to organization on how they go about their business, about how they try to achieve very similar outcomes, right? That third ring is what, or winning, because at the end of the day, that is the most important outcome in professional baseball. And I'm not here to tell you how you should go about your business, but I want you to notice the word to the right of how in this picture, process. I'm here to speak on some of the intricacies of how to develop systems within Major League Baseball from a strength and conditioning perspective. You see, professional baseball is a very small world where strength conditioning professionals have a variety of experiences and backgrounds with different teams and organizations at a variety of different levels, whether it's at the professional level, whether it's at the collegiate level, or whether it's in private practice, what have you. And there is no doubt that bringing people together with a variety of backgrounds and experiences and education and perspectives can be extremely beneficial to an organization or a department. But with that in mind, what that can also do is it can also create a lot of inconsistencies. Remember, everyone has their own biases and preferences. And if we are lacking an organized framework for achieving those outcomes that we desire, winning, it can create a lot of inconsistencies throughout our organization or department. It can also make it extremely challenging, if not impossible, to evaluate the impact that our methods have if we are inconsistent with our systems. Now, take the highway system in the US, for example. It's an integrated network of roads and highways that connect towns and cities from coast to coast. And it can be very confusing and easy to get lost if you're in unfamiliar territory. But if you have a roadmap or your iPhone, you can usually make it to your destination relatively easily. You have a plan. Lynn, can you move up 2 slides, please? Yeah, there we go. And then you have your nervous system, right? A system that interprets the environment around us, and it controls everything that our body does in response to various stimuluses. These are 2 very complex systems that are both highly organized to maximize the effectiveness of their role. The professional baseball system is kind of like these 2 systems. Every team is trying to make it to the same destination, winning the World Series, but every team will take a different route to get there because they're all starting from a different starting point, and they'll all have to respond to various challenges along the way. This is why having these methods and frameworks organized is so important. The first 2 goals are to create efficiency and effectiveness within the department. And the second 2 goals will create reliability and repeatability. Kind of sounds like a research methods course you may have taken in school. But these 2 are essential to ensuring our ability to complete audits on how effective our methodologies are. That will ultimately determine whether we need to make changes to our program or not. All of that sounds great, but it's not lost on me that there are a variety of barriers and challenges that we'll face along the way. Like Landon said, I've spent 16 years in baseball. There's no season is exactly the same. There's always going to be change from year to year. You're always going to run into different barriers. Not everyone will see things the same way. There is no doubt there will be stress during the season. There'll be stress at work, there'll be stress at home, there'll be performance anxiety. All of these stressors can impact health and performance. Injuries will interrupt competition and development plans. There could be philosophical differences between staff members or the department and the player on how to maximize a player's potential. There are many barriers that we will encounter, just like on a road trip across the country. And here are a couple of examples that all major league teams will experience. Okay. Schedule density, right? It's talked about a lot. It's very obvious. It's a more dense schedule than probably any other sport. Major league teams will play they will play 162 games during the regular season in about 180 to 190 days. And this is after 5 to 6 weeks of spring training or their training camp. So it's a lot of work being done in a very short period of time. And then the second barrier that I want to call attention to that all teams will experience is the travel demands. The travel demands are very extensive. They will include time zone changes and coast to coast travel. Teams will have to travel on off days. There'll be overnight flights that disrupt our sleep and circadian rhythms. This year, Baseball Savant has the San Diego Padres traveling the most miles during the regular season of any team, almost 52,000 miles during the regular season. It's a lot of travel. And these are just two examples of barriers that every team will need to get past. Because of all the barriers and the different variables that can come into play and my personal views on approaching player development that I mentioned earlier, I believe very strongly that having an organized framework to use as that roadmap throughout the season to get us to our desired destination, winning, is critical to our success as strength conditioning professionals. That being said, I want to share 3 easy steps that will put us in position to utilize the data that we collect and value to improve our training processes. So those 67% of you that answered yes, we collect more data that I do value, but we have trouble implementing that data in a reasonable amount of time. This part is for you. Okay, so the first step is going to be athlete profiling and monitoring. And the first part in this step is creating a performance profiling model, okay? A guide to ensure we are evaluating game demands, profiling our players against those demands. We're going to be goal setting and creating strategies, and finally, how we are going to monitor progress and refine our process over time. But during this step, I'll focus on the second and the fifth part of this model, the athlete profiling and the monitoring portion. Data collection. The profiling and monitoring steps both begin with data collection. This is our genesis. Building a robust data set is an essential component to this process. It cannot be overlooked. Establishing standard operating procedures and protocols to support data collection, interpretation, and reporting needs to be completed in detail and prior to the season. What data gets collected is just as important as how we collect the data, as well as where that data gets stored. One recommendation for serial testing is to build as much of the testing you're going to ask your players to complete into the training that they're going to be completing in season to maximize schedule efficiency due to such a congested schedule of Major League Baseball. For monitoring performance, I usually follow the residual training effects suggestions as an approximate guide for serial testing to evaluate potential positive and negative changes throughout the course of the season. For example, if speed and power qualities change in a week's time, I'm going to evaluate those qualities on a weekly basis, right? Think of a counter movement jump on your force plates. And then second example is if strength qualities are going to take several weeks for a significant change, I'm going to evaluate those qualities accordingly, right? I'm not going to be testing their strength qualities every week. It's going to be every 4 weeks, every 6 weeks, every 8 weeks. something along those lines. Published research can also come in handy here. It can also help guide your test selection, until you have enough internal data to determine your own test and or frequency. And then once you have enough data, you can analyze performance testing data against skill or in-game data for correlations. This sort of statistical analysis can be extremely powerful with regards to future decision-making when determining players' development plans, talent identification, as well as return to performance plans. Here's an example of what it can look like when you profile a full team. Maybe you have all the players come in spring training, you get all the data recorded, you do all the tests, you get all the data recorded, and you can create something like this where you have your full team on one page. This is a combination of pitchers and position players. So you'll notice that some pitchers don't have any sprint data. It's not all that important to what they do. So we're not going to go ahead and test them on that on our physical days. But you can clearly see which players are below average, average, or above average in a number of performance areas. And this information should help to start guiding training interventions. Okay, and then here's an example of a Major League center fielder. For Major League center fielders, the most influential KPIs assist with increased fielding, base running, batted ball exit velocity, and bat speed ability. And then given the positional norms and understanding of the most influential KPIs, we know that most center fielders are going to be below average in weight and body fat. No need to worry about that. We can reason from this information that from a strength conditioning perspective, our training interventions with this player should look to increase absolute power and max velocity sprint speed to optimize their performance in game on the field. Now, when it comes to performance monitoring, it's essential to be able to look beyond individual testing sessions to see how an athlete or group is trending long term. Is the athlete making positive changes? If performance is down on a specific test or metric, is it still within a normal range, or do we need to start some sort of intervention for it? Have they improved a specific KPI, should we adjust their training focus or development plan accordingly? And when injuries occur, because they will occur, clean and consistent data prior to injury should be an important consideration when creating objectives and goals for the return to performance process. Now, number two, the second step is building the infrastructure, right? Collecting and storing data is simply not enough. Unfortunately, just like plenty of other practitioners out there, I'm guilty of doing this as well. I've collected plenty of information that I either didn't act on or didn't act on in an appropriate amount of time, right? We need to learn to do more with less. We must build an infrastructure or a series of outputs, as we'll call it. Landon, can you go back one slide, please? Yeah, go back. Yeah. So we must build an infrastructure, right? A series of outputs, as we'll call them, for the data that we are collecting. The data is our input, and then our programming is our outputs, so that our data can influence what our outputs are. Data is our input, training programs are outputs. And these are going to be some really simple and easy steps, but please pay attention to the details of it. The details is what makes everything work smoothly together and prevents things from slipping through the cracks. Exercise library. I know what you're thinking. He's going to sit here and tell me to build an exercise library like that's some sort of big secret. Kind of, but it's also take notice, like in the video, of some of the details, the KPI derivatives that can help make better decisions during a training session when current exercise information doesn't exist yet. Remember that congested schedule that we were talking about earlier? Every training session is important and adds up over time. Let's not waste any opportunities just because we don't know where to start with an exercise. Then there are the exercise substitutions and the body parts involved in the exercise. This will allow us to automate adjustments in a variety of ways and programs when unforeseen barriers come up during the season. For example, right, we just built out a front squat. So if a wrist injury occurs and a player has a front squat in his program, then by simply putting in an injury or a limitation into that player's profile and making that one adjustment, then any exercises that involve the wrist will automatically adjust to substitute exercises as we've defined. This is far more efficient than going through and making all necessary programming changes for that player one by one, going into each and every day that he has a workout, each and every exercise that involves a wrist, whatever the case may be, or creating another program. We can keep him on the same development plan. We can keep him on the same program. We can just input a simple limitation and have the software do the work for us. Second part to the infrastructure is your periodization and your programs, right? We're talking about output still. Remember, these are the same foundations that any good program is going to be built upon. These outputs are your outputs. What do you value? What does your organization value? How do you think you can help your team win? And what does the research tell you? What does the data tell you is important? What are your most influential KPIs? These outputs need to reflect the adaptations you value from a performance standpoint to help put your players into position to be successful between the lines. And remember, right now, we're still just building the foundation for something greater to exist on. The third step is automating your process. This is the part where things can get fun. Okay. This is the part where things can become really effective and efficient with a large part of your day-to-day work. This is the part where we can start utilizing that valuable data in real time because we have taken the necessary steps in building the infrastructure. This is where we can automate some of our knowledge and experiences to make quick, consistent, and effective changes across an entire organization within seconds. Based on what you and your organization value, you can use your knowledge, your experiences, and your testing thresholds. When you input your valuable data into FIT, conditional logic that you create will automatically place those athletes who qualify into specified groups. You see a short video here demonstrating how this is done for creating hamstring injury risk groups, high and moderate risk, because if they're low risk, we really need a separate group for that, utilizing data that's recorded from a Nord board. This isn't anything earth-shattering, but imagine not having to go and rewrite someone's program every time you get new or more data on them that you value and believe should be actionable. Imagine if that just happened automatically. Here, this is kind of a continuation from the last slide. You'll see on the top left, the image shows the hamstring risk groups and their priority, the high, moderate, and low risk. The bottom left image shows where you would upload one of those programs that you built that would be associated with each group. You have your high risk group, you may have certain program that you want them to do. You have your moderate risk group, you may have certain program that you want them to do. And the low risk, maybe they're just following the normal routine. And the best part is that with conditional logic, you only have to build it once and it automatically gets applied when needed and based on the thresholds that you set, which takes me to the third image. On the right, you see an image of the high risk group and those thresholds that you can so easily set based off of your education experience. It doesn't have to be in newtons in this particular example. It could be percentage of body weight. It could be whatever. Maybe your own internal data tells you to set different thresholds. This sort of system prevents players' needs from slipping through the cracks when managing extremely large groups of players like we do in professional baseball. Across the board in professional baseball, from our Dominican academies up through the major league team, we're over 200 athletes for usually relatively small strength conditioning staffs. Taking the conditional logic to the next step in automating your process is the decision tree feature. Decision trees are really just the conditional logic applied to more inputs with more possible outcomes. The high-level systems that allow us to digest large amounts of data and automate how we use the data based on our tests, our thresholds, and our programming preferences. The first example here on the left is of a wellness questionnaire that, based on the score an athlete puts in, would result in 4 different variations of training that the athlete would complete that day. Anywhere from checking in with a coach to see if training is appropriate, to a half volume day or a modified volume kind of day, to a full go day. And then the second example is utilizing the dynamic strength index, or the DSI, which uses information from a counter movement jump and an isometric belt squat to help determine if that athlete's training interventions should bias strength, velocity, or take more of a balanced approach. And then this example also takes into consideration jump asymmetries as well, which adds an additional layer to the training interventions that you previously built. Now, I understand that that's probably a pretty quick flyover for, especially the decision tree part. But here are a couple QR codes that will go into more detail. On the left is a webinar that Ernie Reimer, one of the creators of FYTT, he did a couple of years ago. It goes into detail about what decision trees are and how to build them out. He'll walk you step by step through it. So I encourage you to go ahead and get your phone out, take a picture of that QR code, get that webinar sent to you to dig into that more. And then the QR code on the right is going to be to an article that was written about decision trees as well. Now, these decision trees have the ability to be extremely informative, and they can be extremely powerful, right? So if you're comfortable and you work through that conditional logic on a simple one input basis, it's how do we start doing that with multiple inputs so we can get multiple outputs and essentially have an entire program that is automated based off of our education, our experiences, and what we want that to look like. And they can and these decision trees can make you extremely efficient with your time, leaving you more time to do the more important things other than sitting behind a desk writing out programming. And then to recap, I just wanted to say, we discussed the importance of utilizing a system-based approach. We identified the barriers to maximizing health performance and therefore the need for a systematic framework. And then we identified 3 steps to building a system that will help you utilize data to improve training processes in real time. Athlete profiling, right? Those are our inputs. Building our training infrastructure based on what our data tells us, which are our outputs. And then some tools to automate that process. Thank you, everybody, for showing up tonight and kind of listening to my thoughts and ideas on how we can better manage our players in season, during the off season, and how we can better utilize our data, the data that we value in real time, and how we can become more efficient and more effective with our processes to give us more time to be more hands-on with our players and do those things that are really important. I have my contact information here. I know this is kind of a quick webinar, but I would love to connect with more people. Have a couple email addresses, my LinkedIn account, everything on there. So if anybody wants to connect, be happy to do that and to discuss anything here or anything else, if you'd like.
Brad, thank you a ton. That was great information. Folks, if you've got questions, you can start writing them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to start clicking and just making sure that everyone can just unmute themselves and ask the question as well. So please go ahead one way or the other and shoot your questions over. Brad, as I'm doing that, one question here is how do you handle remote athletes versus in person?
Yeah, are they talking about with utilizing fit?
Uh, based on, it looks like based on your experience.
So, based on my experience, most of the remote training that I've done has been, with our athletes. Like, we're based in one city, right? And our athletes go all over the world during the off season. So being able to use a system like Fit, right, the central location to where we can put in all of our training programs, whatever it is. The players have the app on their phone, they're able to access their programs. They can send us or input themselves directly into the app through their phone any sort of updated information, something as simple as body weight, or they can send us videos of a vertical jump, and we can kind of calculate some vertical jump heights through those videos using different apps, that sort of thing. um, I'm not sure if that answers their question with regards to handling remote training. But honestly, something like Fit, um, and I've done both in the past. I've used Fit, I've used other AMSs, and I've used, Excel and stuff like that. And Fit has by far been the smoothest, the easiest, and the most convenient, I think, for all parties involved, especially if you're using something like Excel. Um, Instead of having to go and recreate a new program or make edits to it and then resend it out, I can just make the edits straight and Fit, and it just uploads directly onto their phone in their app the next time they access it.
Got it. Thank you. And please go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like to jump in. Here's another one, Brad. What were the most important KPIs that you have tracked during your time in the MLB, and how have you programmed to improve those?
Yeah, so I think one example, well, two examples is probably some of the highest correlation that we've seen consistently across um, a number of performance variables has been lean mass. Um, Whether it's sprint speed or exit velocity or pitch velocity, there's been a relationship between lean mass and all of those, as well as impulse from our force plates. Impulse seems to be the most accurate, kind of measure of lower body power output. And then when you look at that and you kind of understand impulse, there's multiple things that go into creating a higher impulse, whether it's peak force or if it's velocity or if it's duration. So there's a number of different ways to affect impulse depending on what that player's need is. But I think the important part is that we can't lose sight of, the player that the organization wants or needs that person to be, right? If we're increasing somebody's impulse by adding lean mass and potentially making them a half a step slower, because now they're just too heavy. Um, and that goes against what the organization wants or needs. And that's not the most, probably appropriate way to try to influence impulse.
Got it. So lean mass and impulse were two of those. Okay.
Yes.
What other questions do you have, attendees? Anything else you'd like to ask? Brad, you let me just kind of going off of that last question. What when you were at your previous team with the Giants, how were you using how many inputs to your decision trees and how many outputs did you have as you were programming for your athletes?
Yeah. So Um, so I think I can't remember right off how many inputs there were. There's probably so with one thing with regards to like player mobility routines, that was kind of an entire program that was fed through the decision tree process based off. I mean, right off the top of my head, I don't know. There's probably somewhere between a dozen and 20 different inputs that goes into that decision tree. I think it ended up resulting in something like over 500 possible combinations of outputs that could occur for any one player, and it all was individualized. It all was based on what that player needed. Some players, we saw a lot of similarities across baseball, obviously, but there were over five. I think there was over 500 possible like combinations of outputs based off of, I don't know, 15 to 20 different inputs.
So that's a huge level of customization that you programmed in there for each athlete. I mean, their workouts were probably very different as you're looking at them in the weight room.
Yeah, and like I said, right, like dealing with baseball players, you're gonna have a lot of similarities, right? But there's gonna be different groups of guys that have different similarities, and there's gonna be some one-offs that have something that nobody else has, or only a couple of other guys have within the organization. So it's just covering all of the bases, understanding, or kind of everything that we value from, say, a mobility standpoint. Um, Having that process of how it gets measured, inputting that data into fit, and then allowing it to do the work so that seconds later, if we're going through major league camp and there's 80 or 85 guys in major league camp, literally from the time that data gets inputted within seconds, there's 80 or 85 different customized programs get kicked out to each individual's app on their phone. So then when they come in the next morning, they know exactly what they have from like a morning mobility standpoint, as opposed to, the practitioners staying up overnight, basically, after, a 10-hour, 11-hour day of testing to write programs for those 80 guys coming in the next day that expect to have something ready for them to help them get ready for the day.
Got it. Got it. A couple of questions. Um, Two from David. How do you test during the MLB season for position players and pitchers? And when do you test during the season?
Yeah, so we do we'll do intake testing during spring training on physical days. We'd run a full battery of tests on those days. There's some things that we may run on like the first or second day of practice. Like we'd do, for example, we'd do like an estimated VO2 max um, on our pitchers, which is a little bit more important for starting pitchers, but we do it on all pitchers. And then in comparison, or to contrast, we'd do a 20-yard sprint with all of our position players. But with the pitchers, if the guy had a bullpen the next day, we might not put him through that estimated VO2 max test the day before the bullpen, before his first mound session. We may do it, either the day of after his bullpen or the following day. So some of those tests, for the most part, we will run the full battery of tests on everybody day one of spring training. And then there are some one-offs to that. But then we have kind of the things like our counter movement jumps that are less kind of invasive, that we do on a more regular basis, and we do kind of more serial testing of that. We would do that early in the day before guys go outside for practice. We would build as much into workouts as possible at the front end of a workout, so that it becomes a little bit more efficient from their scheduling standpoint. And then something like an isometric belt squat, I may only test maybe 3 times a season. I may do it at the first day of physicals. I may hit them again in the middle of the season, and then again towards the end of the season, to try to monitor how those adaptations are going from a strength standpoint. And typically that would be built into a workout. So I've built workouts in Fit that is basically a combination of tests to where they'll come in, and the first exercise they do as part of some of the plyos that they're going to complete is their counter movement jumps. Maybe their main strength lift is going to be the isometric belt squats that we do, as well as Nordics. And then we have like an upper body sort of circuit that they're going to complete that day. So their test is the training, and then their training is the test on those days.
Got it. And one from Ian, have you noticed any specific trends and or do you have any specific KPIs for pitchers or other specific players?
Sorry, what was the first question?
Have you noticed any specific trends and or do you have any specific KPIs for pitchers and or other specific players?
So, with regards to the trends, it is possible, against contrary belief, to make positive changes in season, right? Even in a professional baseball season when guys are playing every day, it is common to hear, people say or mention like the grind, or they're just grinding and whatever. But I do honestly, personally believe that a large part of the grind, if you will, is more psychological. It is doing it is the monotony of the season. It is the overnight travel, having to wake up for, maybe a day game the next day. Like, it is those sorts of things that make us feel a certain way. And for too many years now, and using different sorts of technology, I've been able to track, trends of players, trends of groups and teams through the course of a season, or through different, training camps or whatever. And it is possible, for guys, whether it is a young rookie or a veteran, to make positive adaptations, strength, power, lean tissue, body composition, what have it, in season. So I think that there is a common belief that it's acceptable to just maintain in season, or small decreases in performance are okay. And that was something that was said to me several years ago, and it never sat well with me. And that's kind of why I've gone down this road of, I don't want to say to prove them wrong, but from the mentality, or from the standpoint that if our players are expected to be at their best at the end of the season, when the games count the most, I'm not okay with them not physically being at their best. So it's up to us to find, a way to make sure that they are at their best at the end of the season. Guys are going to get nicked up, but we need to do our best. And then specific KPIs with regards to pitchers, honestly, I think the highest relationship KPIs tend to come from more biomechanical data.
Got it.
Right? We know that the physical aspect of it can, definitely bleeds into that. Like, if we talk about pitching and we talk about lead leg blocking, bracing, or drifting, right? When that foot plants on the ground, what does that knee do afterwards? Does it continue to drift forward out over the toes? Or does it then start to go into extension and putting force into the ground, which then comes back up through the system? That drifting of the knee will suck velo away, and the ability to at least brace, if not block the knee, can increase velocity. Therefore, lower body strength, rate of force development, all those things can play into that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. One question from Cheryl. Do you believe that the automation will eventually pose a risk to the job security of strength and conditioning professionals?
Absolutely not. It's something that can help make us better at our jobs. It's something to where you're still going to need somebody there to implement it. Just because it's just like the data, just because you have it, or just because you have a program, doesn't mean the player is going to know how to go through it. and it doesn't mean they're going to go through it appropriately, right? There's still things that we need to do that are hands-on with players. So I don't think the automation will take the place of strength conditioning coaches at all.
Got it. And really, it's with the way that you set up your decision trees in Fit, you're kind of just downloading your own the decision trees that you have essentially in your brain, putting those down, and so it's really you coaching and making those changes and modifications to each athlete's workout.
Yeah, so all of the information that is put into the decision tree comes from, the practitioner or the department or whoever, right? So all that information is coming from them. You still need somebody there to, run the tests or whatever, right? Get the data from the players, whether it's force plate information, whether it's range of motion information. Obviously, some of the biomechanical stuff that can come from the major leagues using Hawkeye. That stuff kind of comes automated. Maybe there's an analyst that handles that, so it's not a strength coach. But yeah, all of that stuff can feed into the system. But at the end of the day, you'll still need somebody there to make a decision on what is important information, what should be included and what shouldn't, and then what is the output that we need. Who's going to design the program that's going to have the effect that we're searching for based on that data.
Gotcha. There are a couple of folks that came off mute, and so if they want to jump in and just throw their question out here, that's great. Federico, if you want to just unmute yourself, or you are unmuted, so you're welcome to just ask that question if you'd like.
Yeah, what data are we looking for specifically when it comes to tracking the athlete during season? Is there something that we're looking for when we know that injury might be right around the corner? What does the data show us when we look at these things? What is it you're looking at specifically for to prevent that injury?
So I think that that's a pretty slippery slope to go down, right? When we start talking about trying to prevent injuries, because if an injury doesn't occur, we don't ever know if we prevented it or not. All we can do is go off of the best information that we have, whether that's published research, our own internal research, or even things that we've seen, right? And I guess we can kind of go back. Hamstring strains are so prevalent in Major League Baseball, right? So we can go back to the example that I used earlier in the slideshow. So in one case in the video, I don't know if you guys noticed it, but I built out the conditional formatting for that to use a percentage of the player's body weight. But in the image, it used, I think it was maybe 360 newtons as the cutoff for a high risk group, which is coming from the research that the Vault group put out, years ago now. But at the end of the day, somebody could be pulling 300 newtons and never get injured, right? And somebody could be pulling 500 newtons, 2.5 times their body weight and be injured twice, say, because there's more variables that go into it. So all we're trying to do is eliminate some of those variables, right? Like we want to track and put in place an output for a hamstring risk. Eccentric strength is one of the main ones. I know I don't have numbers to back it up, but I've just, and maybe it's my own kind of intuition, but I've seen it when guys are below double body weight in newtons. So if somebody weighs 200 pounds and if they're below 400 newtons on a Nord board, those players tend to get injured more often than the players that are above 2 times body weight. But those guys that are above 2 times body weight still get injured sometimes, just not at as high of a rate. So that's just one way that you can kind of look at injuries, whether you want to use, eccentric hamstring strength information, whether you want to use, thoracic spine rotation, whether you want to use any other sort of range of motion, shoulder flexion, anything like that. If you want to use sprint mechanics information, anything like that could go into it. It just really comes back to what does your education, what is your experience kind of tell you and your group, and what do you guys value, and then what can you actually change. Sorry, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So the injury one is can be very complicated and challenging.
Here's one, Brad. Can you elaborate on increasing performance during a full baseball season? What data do you look at to monitor fatigue? Or do you use a minimum effective dose method?
So let's see. So in the past, we have used some fatigue monitors. It wasn't in FIT, it was in our internal system, and it was more to do with relief pitchers, and it took into a number of variables, such as like velocity, number of pitches thrown above a certain threshold. It is taken into account for days in a row that they've pitched, stuff like that. And essentially it would give us a kind of like a low, moderate, high kind of risk score. So we've done that in the past with relievers, but that again was in an internal system that was built quite a while before FIT was even finalized. And then what was the second part to it?
Yeah, Brad, sorry, I should have read, there were 3 questions really, so I should have read those separately. What data do you look at to monitor fatigue?
Okay, so that kind of like reliever score one would be one example of what we'd look at. And yeah, that's probably the best example that I can give.
And then can you elaborate on increasing performance during a full baseball season?
Yeah, and I know there's something in there about the minimum effective dose, right? And that's kind of is probably the same thing or very closely aligns with this idea of microdosing, which in a major league season I love, or in a professional baseball season I love. It is a very small dose of, maybe it's a specific or it's a blend of qualities, but it's never too many exercises or too much volume that really fatigues a player or leaves them sore for the next day or two. And I think it can be a really effective method, particularly for the guys that are going to play every day. So your position players or your relief pitchers who could potentially pitch any day. So I think the minimum effective dose or the microdosing approach is extremely important. I think more and more professionals are starting to adopt that, especially in season. And I do believe that is an in-season method, not necessarily off-season. In contrast, starting pitchers, they're almost kind of like on that football schedule, right? Like they've got to go out and they've got to compete once every 5 days. So I don't know that there's really that you necessarily need to use that methodology with a starting pitcher in season.
Then 2 more questions, Brad. I'll start with the first one. What are your thoughts on a conditioning test when players report for spring training?
Love it. Yeah. And I mentioned it earlier as well, that we would do it on the first day for most guys. We would do a conditioning test per se, with all of our pitchers in spring training, basically on our physical day. There would be a handful of guys that had bullpens the following day, and we would push that conditioning test back with them. We would done a couple different versions. We've done some mass runs, some maximal aerobic speed runs. But then once I kind of got to the major league level and you're dealing with a little bit of an older population sometime, a few more bumps and bruises along the way, a little more miles on on their bodies. We've opted for a conditioning test that we would use on a watt bike, in combination with some heart rate monitors, to try to get an estimated VO2 max. And then with our position players, we wouldn't necessarily do a conditioning test, but we would do a 20-yard sprint that was filmed, and we would either use laser system or 1080 sprint.
Got it. And then probably of those, here's the next question, of the tests that you just mentioned, which test do you prefer? What's the best conditioning test that you've found?
Oh, the best conditioning test. So I mean, I think, you know, I think the watt bike one has been great more recently. Like we've gone through, we've done a lot of the same things that a lot of other, organizations or college settings and stuff like that have done. I think in the professional baseball setting, utilizing the watt bike paired up with the heart rate monitors, is probably has probably been the best option. And I say that because everybody can complete it, right? And we're kind of talking about like collecting data here and that sort of thing, right? Kind of the worst thing for somebody who's looking at data is when the data doesn't exist, right? Or bad data, misleading data. But everybody can complete the conditioning test on the watt bike. But then it's also like it's a little bit more repeatable in season, right? Obviously, you have to pick your spots. Your starting pitchers, no issues there. They're going to pitch. They're going to have 4 days off. That's easy. But then you have to pick your spots. Like there's going to be days where relievers are 100% down. They've thrown the last 2 or 3 days in a row. They've had a highly stressful, outing or whatever. And we know that unless we play 18 innings, that guy isn't pitching. So maybe that's a good day for it. Right. In place of their conditioning, you just do the conditioning test, make the test the training the test. Aerobic in nature.
Got it. Well, we're at the top of the hour. These were all great questions. We really appreciate your participation to everyone that has attended. We will be sending out an email follow-up that has a link to the recording, so you can go back and listen to this again. And then, Brad, a huge thanks to you for taking time to share your expertise and experience with us. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It was my pleasure. And like I said earlier, I put my email addresses and my LinkedIn and stuff like that up there on that last slide. If anybody has any other questions, anybody wants to reach out, anything like that, please feel free to. Love to chop it up and talk shop about this stuff. So
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Brad.
you're very welcome. Thank you, everybody.